Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The trial of Mohamed Morsi. What is this trial all about? Constitutional legitimacy or political retribution? Can Morsi get a fair trial? For the military-backed government, the trial is key to showing its plan for transition towards democracy. How sound of a plan is this? And what message does this trial send to the Muslim world? To cross-talk the situation in Egypt, I'm joined by Shadi Taha in Washington. He's an Egyptian political activist. And in Pittsburgh, we cross to Gregg. He is a former Israeli official in the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. All right, gentlemen, cross-talk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Let's go to Washington first. Shadi, in Washington, the trial that has been adjourned, it started and it's already been adjourned, has been described by Morsi supporters as illegal, unfair, unjust, and unconstitutional. How do you react to that?
Well, first, thanks for having me on your show. We can't judge this trial and call it unfair when it hasn't started yet. Yesterday, we had the first hearing, but there are signals and there are signs that we have seen that may make us believe that this trial is turning to be a political feud, and this is what we don't need to see. At this point, the current provisional government has been backing or has been backed by the military. And this is a yucky situation for the military, which is supposed to be more independent. I personally believe that the trial could have been postponed until the roadmap gets accomplished. There are clear steps to where we can place Egypt back on democracy, finishing the constitution, holding a parliamentary and a presidential election, and then the elected government, the newly elected government, could have been in power while a trial like this would take place.
Okay, Gregg, in Pittsburgh, I mean, I saw the pictures of the trial. It was held for a very short amount of time, and it was a fiasco. And it looks like a political vendetta. Is this what this trial is going to be all about? And we'll talk about, if it is a vendetta, what kind of legitimacy does it have? Go ahead.
Well, the most legitimate institution in Egypt right now is the judiciary. They were able to go through a full trial and appeals process to take on Hosni Mubarak for the crimes that he allegedly committed during the 2011 uprising. And now you see the crimes of the Muslim Brotherhood being put on trial. And if they are found guilty, there may be an appeals process and there may be another acquittal. What we really have to understand in Egypt today is on the backdrop of the political process and reformation that's going on by the military-backed provisional government is a sagging economy, a weakening tourism industry, terrorism being strewn throughout the Sinai Peninsula. And on the backdrop of all these issues, Egypt has to be able to stand firm, not just within its own political influx, which is currently going on, but also in its relations with the rest of its neighbors in the region and around the world. The trial of Mohamed Morsi may be the centerpiece for judicial jurisprudence right now in Egypt, but this must be taken within the context, as the previous speaker had said, within the provision of a new government, and also within the tide and the context.
Well, no, but Gregg, the trial is going on. It's already started, okay? I think, maybe it should have been different, but we've already started this game here. And, Gregg, I would go back to you. I mean, this judiciary that you're talking about was at war with Morsi during the entire time he was in office before he was ousted. So do you have still confidence in the judiciary when you had a force that was appointed by the former president? I mean, I don't see that they got along very well. And there's no reason to believe they're going to get along very well now.
It's not within the context of whether the judiciary is an independent institution apart from the rest of the government. What you have to take into context is that the judiciary that put Hosni Mubarak on trial is now putting another former president on trial. And the fact is that the individuals who are part of that establishment are not swaying to any political allegiance. No one makes Ahmed Tawfiq or Abdel Sisi or any of the other political powers an ally of the judiciary. What they are doing is showing that they have independence, as was done in the Port Said massacre, during the 14 death sentences that they were given out during the last football with the Ultra conflict that took place about a year ago.
Okay,
so they have shown on the left and the right, or
what about the security forces that killed protesters since the coup? Are they being put on trial? Is there much investigation into that?
There are beliefs that or there are hopes that Morsi should be getting a fair trial. Now, with the military being in this situation, it's not helping the military. The military needs to go back to the actual job that the military should be doing, which is protecting the nation from any external enemies. Now, I don't actually see a reason for why we are speeding to go through this trial. Mubarak, it took us 8 months to put him on trial. We could have waited for a couple of more months until a newly elected government would be in power. I honestly believe that whatever happened yesterday is just adding more to the fuel of the polarization that is happening in Egypt. This is taking us away from what needs to happen, which is reconciliation and going through a transitional justice, which is strongly needed at this point in Egypt.
Okay, Gregg, ever since, the fall of Mubarak, we had a number of elections in Egypt, and the result kept being the same. And you know what that result is. I mean, how do you square the circle? You want to have a judiciary, but you don't want to have a democracy. Even if you don't like the outcomes, you don't accept them, and then you turn to the military to overturn it. I mean, that's a cul-de-sac for any kind of society moving towards democracy, isn't it?
It's not when the democratically elected forces and people who they put in power abuse democratic institutions. We saw President Morsi suspend the Constitution. We saw him try to take absolute rule and power away from the military. We saw him fire Tantawi and put al-Sisi in place. And he essentially went against any constitution that was being drafted. And in doing so, he was trying to empower his majority that was in the lower house of parliament, and eventually he would try to maintain absolute power. Just because the political party uses democracy as a way to get elected does not mean that they have the authority to absolve democratic institutions once they are in power. And that's why the July 3rd coup took place. There's a certain marker which goes in terms of the temperature of the democratic establishment.
At least you call it a coup. That's progress there. If I can go back to Washington, Shadi, do you think that the Egyptian military is just going to crowd out the political field? Because apparently there's going to be an election, and I think we all know who's going to be elected, and he may be the only candidate to run.
Are you asking my personal opinion, Pete?
Go ahead. Yep.
I don't think General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi should run in the upcoming presidential election. I think he is strongly needed as a military general. He is strongly needed as somebody who can defend this country from anything that might damage the political and the democratic process. Again, this should be. And, at the end of the day, it is the decision of the Egyptian people. If Abdel Fattah al-Sisi wants to run, he may resign from his post and join the political arena, and the people will decide who will be the next president. But I'm saying my personal opinion. I think the country needs him more to be the head of this military.
Gregg, do you think the military...
Egypt is a big country.
It's a big country, it's very diverse, and it's very divided. Gregg, can the military bring democracy to Egypt?
I think they can. They showed that they were able to bring democracy in the first round. Unfortunately, those who were elected decided to abuse democracy. And around this time, I think they might have learned from the inability of certain forces within religion and politics and having this sort of cross divide between Islamism and political Islam being within the Egyptian parliament and the Egyptian presidency, that the new constitution that they're drafting, maybe on the third time they'll actually get it right.
Gregg, so you think that Islamic parties should be banned from the political process in Egypt?
It's not what I think. It's what the Egyptian people think.
Well, what do you think?
Representatives right now who are putting the constitution
there's still
together.
quite a few protesters out there for the ousted president. I mean, what this trial is showing is just the great divisions within the country here. He still has support, maybe not majority, but it's still significant. Shadi, how do you feel about that in Washington? What is the role of political Islam in the political process now? Is it going to be completely shut out? And I'm looking at the Muslim Brotherhood here.
I think it will not benefit liberals to keep Islamists away from the political scene. It gives them more sympathy. It gives them more support. I honestly believe that the Muslim Brotherhood, they have lost most of their grassroots and most of their support during that 1 year of the ruling of Mohamed Morsi, because they were placed under the test and they did not deliver. So bringing Islamic parties on top, on the table, having them participate in the political scene is not a bad thing. Actually, it works out well, or it worked out well for the liberal voices during that last year, because you just can't speak with religion or with the name of God for long. You may win one election with that, but it's not going to deliver jobs to people. It's not going to deliver food and shelter. People now in Egypt, they have realized that voting for the right politician who may provide the better policies is what they will go for. But keeping Islamic groups in the dark and not allowing them participate in the political scene will backfire.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Egypt. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the political turmoil in Egypt and the trial of Mohamed Morsi. Okay, Gregg, I'd like to go back to you in Pittsburgh. We just heard at the end of the first part of the program here about the nature of political Islam in the democratic process. Does it worry you more that the Brotherhood won't participate any longer in the political process? And, they've been there for decades, and they thrived under a dictatorship. Maybe that's what's going to happen now if they're excluded from the political process in the future, because there's every likelihood that's going to be the case.
Right, but the Muslim Brotherhood, since its inception, was always sort of a pressure valve to allow the regime, regardless of if it was at the beginning of the Egyptian Republic or until today, when we see the army once again having oversight over the provisional government, to allow the forces in power to sort of act as an accordion or a pressure valve to be able to control what was going on the street. You saw that the Muslim Brotherhood, besides its political prowess, also ran extensive social welfare networks and religious institutions that didn't just provide handouts to the needy, but had educational systems, their own institutions for political indoctrination. And eventually, as the previous speaker said, when they get into power, that's when the true challenge affects them. Now, if we have the Muslim Brotherhood outlawed as a movement, which is what is currently on track to happen in Egypt, it's not going to be because of their political positions. It'll be because of the violence that they incited during the July uprising that took place against President Morsi, and also in the subsequent aftermaths outside the Red Mosque and some of the other violent incidents that they
Well, I'm glad, Shadi, if I go to Washington, what about the violence that the regime commits against protesters? It seems very one-sided at this point.
It is, actually. And, Egypt is taking its very first and strong steps towards democracy. In the last 3 years, we saw 2 ex-presidents being, accountable for their decisions and for what they did to the Egyptian people. But we still have a lot of questions on whether every institution in Egypt will be questioned or will be accountable for their actions.
Does that include the military? Does that include the military? Because Mubarak was thrown under a bus by the military. You can talk all you want about protests. It was the military that threw him under a bus. They decided to get rid of him, not the people protesting against him. This is what I'm getting at. I mean, accountability. I mean, I find it really interesting as you have Egyptian liberals. Where are their voices right now? Are they behind the tanks?
Well, I mean, I will not go as far as saying that they are behind the tanks, but I will say that every institution in Egypt should be held accountable, including the military. Nobody is above the law. And ever since the 25th of January revolution, the rules has been set, and you cannot think that you are above the law. You cannot think that people will not judge you one day. Now,
yeah, but isn't the military acting that way? But isn't the military acting that way right now? Just last week, we have the military saying that there should be no public criticism of the military in Egypt. I mean, accountability. This is what's
and that's not going to go well. And that will not settle well with Egyptian. Perhaps it may appear that it settles well with them now, but within months, I would promise you that it's not going to continue. People cannot go back. Egypt will not go back to the dark days where we could not speak up or where we could not question the leader of our country. Now, this is again brings us to whether the military wants to play that political role or not. Because being in a political role in Egypt, it's like being on the hot seat. People will judge you. People will question you. People will hold you accountable. I don't want the military to be in this place. That's why I'm always calling for speeding up the process, handing over to an elected government. This will save or will hold in danger of having the military interfering in the political arena.
Gregg, how confident are you that? And we just heard that the Egyptians don't want to go backwards. They don't want to go back to living under dictatorships, okay? Maybe you're both right. This is a transition. But, the recent past doesn't bode well for the future, okay? Because once you have power, the appetite comes with the eating. Do you think the military is going to let go? And number two, can they deliver on all the things that you mentioned earlier in the program, like unemployment, jobs, food, inflation, energy, et cetera, et cetera? Can they do that? Are they good at it? Or should they just be in the barracks protecting the nation's borders?
Well, in the first round of the Egyptian revolution, we saw Tantawi, the former defense minister, take over for the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. We saw Morsi elected. And then we saw Tantawi fired by Morsi and put into an adversarial position. Afterwards, in this next round, we saw Morsi abuse his power as Mubarak has abused his. But there's several key differences of how the military is involved with this regime versus how it was involved with the Mubarak regime. In the previous regime under Mubarak, Muslim Brotherhood members and dissidents were put under military trials. They were locked away in dark prisons, and there was no knowledge of where they were being held. In the trial process right now for Morsi, we know what prison he's in. He's received 2 foreign delegations of foreign dignitaries visiting him, and has also been allowed familial visits. So just in the way that the trial is being conducted between Mubarak and Morsi is a stark difference. Now, when we get to your second question,
is that public relations? That's all? Is it public relations for Washington?
No, it's not public relations whatsoever. If the army was interested in maintaining power, and we saw that their public relations play with Washington didn't work out since the aid was suspended. But going back to that point of whether it was just a public relations coup, they could have simply put him behind Al-Tora prison with a military tribunal, sentenced him as he was previously sentenced for the Wadi Natum prison outbreak, and afterwards seeing that he would go into a dark hole never to be heard from again. But that's not the process that's going on right now.
Let's go back to Washington. The issue of aid was brought up here, and I think this is why the trial is to show that the Egyptians are on the right path, quote unquote, as we heard from Secretary of State Kerry. If I can go back to Washington here, what about aid from Washington? And let's talk about the aid that Egypt is getting now from Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia. Now the junta in Cairo has a comfort zone, because if Washington wants to play politics, and I think all three of us agree Washington's done a very horrible job in dealing with this situation in Egypt. But, the Egyptians leadership can just turn to Saudi Arabia for a blank check. I mean, that's pretty nice for the military.
Well, let's take it step by step, Pete. First, I don't really think that the U.S. has any effect whatsoever in whatever goes on in Egypt after the 25th of January. It's the Egyptian people who are deciding. So unlike what people in the opposition may claim that the U.S. Is backing Morsi. We used to hear liberals saying that when Morsi was in power, and now we hear people from the Muslim Brotherhood claiming that the U.S. is backing el-Sisi and backing the military. I honestly believe that the U.S. Did not support any president after Mubarak or any Egyptian leader after Mubarak. Ever since the 25th of January, the U.S. had been just playing the role of the watcher, the viewer, perhaps this is
maybe you're right. Maybe they're in a quandary here. But let me go back to Gregg. I mean, Israel and Saudi Arabia are very keen on this regime in Cairo right now. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would say that their position, regardless of the relevancy towards what's going on in Cairo right now, is positive. I mean, Saudi Arabia and Israel, on two separate sections, are probably at their best relations with Egypt now since July 3rd. The amount of security cooperation that's going on between Israel and Egypt is unbelievable, according to what's going on with the shutdown on Hamas right now. And the Saudi financing of the current regime is really proving to be the backbone of keeping the Egyptian economy afloat. But the reason why they're doing that is not related to the new regime who's in power right now.
Neither country is particularly interested in Egyptian democracy, though, is it? What the people want. Because Saudi Arabia and Israel prefer to deal with dictators in Egypt. It's been their tradition. It's worked out well for them in the past.
That's completely incorrect. Mohamed Morsi negotiated a ceasefire by himself between Hamas and Israel. A democratically elected president of Egypt negotiated a ceasefire between both two opposing forces. One he was allied with, the Islamist Hamas, and one Israel that he saw was in his best benefit to have peace between those two movements. And only 3 weeks after he negotiated that ceasefire did he abuse his democratic privileges by absolving the Constitution and trying to take absolute power. That's where his downfall began.
Okay, let's go to Washington. Would that justify the coup then, to justify the removal of Morsi from power?
Actually, I had a question for Craig. Does Craig find it interesting that, there are national newspapers, Egyptian national newspapers, that they write every day on the front page of the newspaper of Al-Ahram, they claim that Israel is still backing the Muslim Brotherhood and not the other way around. So the current government, they claim it's the other way around. It's not that Israel is backing this current government. It's backing Mohamed Morsi and backing the Muslim Brotherhood.
Gregg, that was addressed to you. Do you want to react to that?
That's complete.
Go ahead, Gregg.
Sure, that's completely false. We just saw the visit of Secretary Kerry to Cairo, and in the discussions that he was having, there was how can the Egyptian government, the provisional government that's in power right now, help the Palestinians and the Israelis move closer to the peace agreement through the negotiations that are going on right now. Any suggestion that Israel backs a Muslim Brotherhood-ran government over its natural partners in the Egyptian liberal opposition and also the Coptic opposition
and the military.
Also amongst most
and the military
and the military, who they often work with on the borders, is preposterous.
Sorry, gentlemen, we've run out of time.
They are complete
Many
opposite
thanks to my
ends of
guests
the
today in
political
Washington and in Pittsburgh, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.